You arrive without fully knowing why you are here. There is no clear intention guiding you, only a subtle pressure behind your thoughts, like a door that has been leaning inward for some time and has finally begun to give way. Something has shifted, not dramatically, not violently, quietly, the kind of shift you only notice when silence starts to feel crowded. You sense it first as unease, a restlessness that does not belong to fear alone. It feels older than anxiety, heavier than doubt. It hums beneath your daily gestures, beneath your words, beneath the face you show the world. You can still function. You can still speak and decide and move. Yet something inside you has stopped agreeing automatically. A tension has formed between what you do and what watches you doing it. You stand at a threshold that does not announce itself. There is no sign, no instruction, no promise waiting on the other side. Only the awareness that the familiar ground has grown thin. The old structures that once held your certainty now echo when you step on them. They still exist, but they no longer feel solid. They feel rehearsed, borrowed, like clothes that once fit perfectly and now sit awkwardly on your shoulders. You may feel a strange pull toward what you once avoided, toward questions that do not resolve cleanly, toward images that disturb your sense of order, toward a quiet voice that does not command, yet does not leave you alone. It does not explain itself. It simply waits, patient, insistent, as if it knows you will eventually have to listen. There is a sense of loss here, though nothing obvious has been taken from you. A loss of certainty, a loss of the hero you once believed you had to be. The part of you that thrived on direction, on clarity, on moving forward without looking down. That part still breathes, but it has grown tense, defensive, proud in ways you no longer trust. You feel it when you slow down, when the noise fades just enough for another rhythm to be heard. Something raw, something unfinished, something that does not ask to be fixed, only acknowledged. It presses against you from within, not as an enemy, but as a presence that has been waiting for your attention. Images begin to surface without your permission. A dark forest at dusk, a narrow gate standing open, unattended, fire flickering without warmth, a child watching from a distance, neither innocent nor corrupt, simply there. These images do not explain themselves. They do not arrive to comfort you. They arrive because they must. You sense that whatever is approaching cannot be managed the way you manage tasks or problems. It will not respond to control. It will not submit to force. It requires something else from you, something quieter, something more dangerous, a willingness to remain present without rushing toward meaning. You are not being asked to understand. Not yet. You are being asked to stay, to stand where you are without retreating into distraction or certainty, to feel the weight of what is stirring beneath the surface of your life. The threshold does not demand courage. It demands honesty, and so you remain, breathing, listening, allowing the tension to exist without resolving it. The door does not close behind you. It never does. What waits beyond it has already noticed you. You step forward, and the ground changes beneath you. Not suddenly, not violently, but unmistakably. What once felt like surface now feels porous, as if every step sinks slightly deeper than expected. The familiar orientation dissolves. Directions blur. Forward no longer feels different from inward. You realize that whatever you crossed was not a boundary in space, but an attitude. The images that hovered at the edge now surround you. They do not line up. They do not cooperate. They appear the way dreams do, with their own logic, their own gravity. A forest stretches endlessly, trees pressed close together, their branches tangled like unspoken thoughts. Light filters through in fragments, never enough to illuminate the whole. You move, but the forest does not clear. It thickens. You feel watched, though no eyes reveal themselves. The sensation does not come from outside. It rises from within, from a place that knows your movements before you make them. You sense figures forming in the dark. Not characters, not symbols you can name, but presences shaped by tension. They carry qualities rather than faces. Pride without confidence. Fear without object. Desire without direction. The voice that accompanies you does not guide. It does not reassure. It reflects. When you tense, it grows silent. When you resist, it presses closer. You begin to notice how often you reach for control, how quickly you try to impose order when the unknown approaches. Here, that reflex fails. The more you attempt to dominate the terrain, the more it resists definition. You encounter the figure of strength you once relied on. It stands tall, familiar, composed of certainty and will. It is the part of you that believed clarity was a virtue and dominance a necessity. Yet here, it feels strangely rigid, out of place. Its confidence echoes hollowly, like armor worn in a place where movement matters more than protection. This figure does not attack you. It does not threaten. It simply stands between you and something else. Something smaller, quieter, something that does not look powerful at all. You feel irritation rise, impatience. Why should this fragile presence matter more than what has carried you this far? Why should the strong yield to the weak? The forest responds to this tension. The air grows heavier. Fire appears without warning, not consuming, but illuminating contradictions. You see how strength has hardened into pride, how certainty has narrowed perception, how the hero you trusted has begun to block rather than protect. The realization does not arrive as insight. It arrives as discomfort. You feel guilt, though you cannot yet name its source. It is not moral guilt. It is existential. The sense that something essential has been denied space to live. That something has been carried too long without being allowed to breathe. The weight of this realization presses down, not as punishment, but as gravity. Water emerges. A river cutting through the forest, dark and slow. It does not invite crossing. It reflects fragments of your face, distorted by movement. You recognize yourself and do not. The reflection shifts constantly, refusing to settle. You sense that the river carries what you have pushed aside. Unlived impulses, abandoned questions, feelings judged unworthy and buried. You hesitate at its edge. Part of you wants to turn back, to reclaim the surface, the clarity, the familiar world where meanings are fixed and roles are clear. Another part of you knows that retreat would not restore what was lost. The door behind you remains open, but it no longer feels like safety. It feels like repetition. Figures move near the water. Opposites that refuse separation. Beauty intertwined with cruelty. Wisdom bound to blindness. Love carrying the scent of danger. You recoil, then realize the recoil itself is part of the encounter. You are not meant to approve or condemn. You are meant to witness. The voice returns, quieter now, almost indistinguishable from your own breath. It does not ask what you think. It asks what you can endure. Can you remain present when contradictions do not resolve? Can you allow images to exist without translating them into conclusions? Can you stay when the ground refuses to become solid? You feel the temptation to escape into interpretation, to label, to categorize, to make sense. The forest resists this too. Every attempt to explain drains the images of their vitality. They grow thin when handled intellectually, like animals trapped in definitions. You begin to understand that meaning here is not extracted. It is lived. The descent deepens. The light fades further. You sense that something essential is being stripped away, not by force, but by exposure. The structures that once defined you cannot survive unchanged in this terrain. They were never meant to. They belong to another layer of life. You do not yet know what will remain. You only know that what descends with you must be willing to change. The forest closes in gently, relentlessly. And you continue not because you are certain, but because turning back no longer feels possible. You move deeper and time loosens its grip. Minutes stretch. Thoughts slow. The rhythm of your breath becomes louder than your inner commentary. The forest no longer feels like a place you are walking through. It feels like a state you are entering, a density that wraps itself around your attention and asks you to stay. You begin to notice how sensations carry memory. The smell of damp earth stirs something ancient in you, something that existed before explanation. The crackle of distant fire awakens a tension you recognize from childhood, from moments when fascination and fear lived side by side. These impressions do not arrive as recollections. They arrive as living currents, moving through you without asking permission. A clearing opens, not wide, not welcoming. In its center stands a mirror, tall and unadorned, resting directly on the ground. It does not reflect the forest behind you. It reflects movement within you. When you approach, your image shifts. Sometimes you appear older, sometimes younger. Sometimes your face carries authority. Sometimes it carries need. You realize the mirror is not interested in accuracy. It is interested in truth. You feel the urge to look away. The mirror exposes something you have learned to keep functional but distant. The tension between who you present and who watches from behind that presentation. The observer you have relied on for control now finds itself observed. This reversal unsettles you. It strips away the illusion that awareness belongs solely to the ego. Heat rises. Fire flickers at the edges of the clearing, not threatening, not consuming. It illuminates the mirror from different angles, revealing images layered beneath images. You see moments when pride saved you, moments when it isolated you, moments when humility felt like weakness, moments when it felt like relief. None of these moments cancel the others. They coexist, demanding space together. You feel resistance tighten in your chest. A familiar reflex. The need to choose one image and reject the rest. To define yourself by a single narrative that feels manageable. The mirror refuses this. Each attempt to fix your identity causes the image to fracture further. You begin to understand that coherence here does not come from simplification, but from endurance. A presence forms beside you, not a figure you can name, not a voice you can quote. It feels like an atmosphere, like a pressure that invites surrender without command. You sense that this presence does not want your obedience. It wants your participation. It waits for you to stop defending your coherence. The fire grows brighter for a moment, and you see the hero again. Not as a figure standing apart, but as a pattern woven through your history. The moments you chose strength over listening, action over reflection, victory over integration. You feel gratitude for this figure. It carried you when you needed momentum. It protected you when the world demanded certainty. And yet you also see its shadow, how it silenced softer impulses, how it dismissed ambiguity as weakness, how it demanded progress even when the soul asked for stillness. The realization does not condemn the hero. It places it in context, a role that has fulfilled its function and now resists relinquishing control. A sensation of grief emerges, subtle but persistent. Not grief for something lost, but for something delayed. Parts of you that waited patiently while the hero ran ahead. Feelings that were postponed for later. Questions that were buried under achievement. The mirror reflects this grief without dramatizing it. It simply holds it. You notice how the forest responds. The trees lean inward slightly as if listening. The river you passed earlier can be heard again, closer now. Its sound carries both continuity and change. Water moving forward by surrendering shape. You feel the metaphor settle into your body rather than your mind. Breath becomes an anchor. Inhale, the fire warms. Exhale, the mirror softens. You are no longer trying to understand what is happening. You are allowing yourself to be shaped by it. The presence beside you remains steady, unhurried. It does not rescue you from tension. It teaches you how to stay with it. The clearing does not resolve. The mirror does not disappear. The hero does not die dramatically. Instead, something quieter occurs. Your grip loosens. Just enough. The forest does not open yet, but it no longer presses as tightly. You sense that this is not an ending, but a turning. A subtle reorientation that prepares the next descent without announcing it. And so you remain, suspended between reflection and movement, feeling the slow rearrangement taking place beneath your awareness, knowing that what comes next will deepen what has already begun. You do not leave the clearing. It dissolves around you. The mirror fades into the air, not gone but absorbed. Its surface lingers in your perception, now internal, now everywhere. You carry it with you as you move, though movement itself feels altered. Less deliberate, more receptive. The forest grows darker, yet your eyes adjust. You begin to sense rather than see. The boundaries between thought and feeling blur. You notice how often you once demanded clarity before allowing yourself to proceed. Here, clarity arrives only after you relinquish that demand. You walk by trusting the weight of your steps, the pull of breath, the subtle cues rising from beneath language. You encounter figures again, though they are closer now, less theatrical. They no longer appear as strangers. They feel intimate, familiar. One carries longing without direction. Another carries judgment without certainty. Another holds tenderness wrapped in suspicion. You recognize them not as intruders, but as residents. They have always lived here. They simply waited for you to descend far enough to meet them without armor. The urge to negotiate returns, to improve them, to make them more acceptable. You feel how deeply this impulse runs. The need to refine the psyche into something presentable. The forest resists refinement. It accepts only presence. When you stop trying to correct what appears, the figures settle. They do not vanish. They become quieter, more grounded. Fire reappears, this time within you. Not as passion, not as ambition, but as warmth. A steady heat that softens rigidity. You sense how often intensity was mistaken for aliveness. How effort was confused with truth. The fire here does not burn away. It transforms by proximity. It allows what was frozen to thaw at its own pace. You feel the hero again, but now it is tired. Not defeated. Simply exhausted from carrying a singular image of purpose. You sense its pride loosening, not through humiliation, but through honesty. The realization dawns gently. The hero was never wrong. It was incomplete. It carried one side of life and mistook it for the whole. A child appears at the edge of your awareness. Not symbolic, not innocent, curious, observant. It watches without demanding answers. It does not ask where you are going or why. It simply remains attentive. You feel something soften in response. A memory of openness that existed before strategy took over. Before every movement needed justification. Water flows nearby again. You do not approach it this time. You listen. The sound carries layers. Loss and renewal intertwined. You recognize that what flows away also nourishes what remains. The psyche does not hoard. It circulates. What stagnates becomes heavy. What moves finds form elsewhere. You notice how contradictions no longer provoke immediate discomfort. They still exist. Beauty still brushes against cruelty. Wisdom still neighbors blindness. But your reaction has shifted. You are no longer trying to resolve them into coherence. You allow them to coexist without collapsing inward. This tolerance is not indifference. It is capacity. The presence that accompanied you earlier feels closer now, less separate. You realize it does not speak because it does not need to. It has always been there, behind the voice that narrates your life, behind the witness that evaluates your experience. It does not oppose you. It contains you. Breath deepens again. With each cycle, something rearranges itself subtly. You cannot name it. Naming would shrink it. You sense alignment not as harmony, but as willingness. Willingness to stay with what is alive, even when it does not flatter you. The forest begins to thin, though you do not feel relief. You feel readiness, not for resolution, but for further exposure. You sense that what lies ahead will not contradict what you have encountered. It will amplify it. The rhythm continues, steady, unhurried, carrying you deeper into the same field from another angle, where the next movement waits to unfold. The forest no longer feels external. You realize that what surrounds you now is woven from the same material as your thoughts, your sensations, your hesitations. The distinction between inner and outer thins until it becomes irrelevant. You are not moving through something. You are moving as something. The ground beneath you softens, like soil after rain. Each step leaves an impression that lingers. You sense how every encounter has shaped you, not as memory, but as contour. The psyche carries its history not in stories, but in posture, in how you approach what is unknown, in how quickly you brace yourself, in how slowly you allow yourself to rest. You feel the echo of earlier resistance, but it has changed texture. It is no longer sharp. It is tired. It does not fight. It questions quietly, wondering if vigilance is still required. You let the question remain unanswered. For once, uncertainty does not feel like a threat. It feels like space. A temple appears without architecture. You recognize it not by walls or columns, but by atmosphere. The air grows still. Sound dims. Breath becomes deliberate. You realize that this place has always existed, not as sanctuary, but as center. A point of orientation that does not impose direction. It receives. At the heart of this presence, you feel yourself observed again. Not evaluated. Not measured. Seen. The gaze does not penetrate. It holds. You sense that this is what you once sought from the world without knowing it. Not validation. Recognition. The kind that does not require performance. The hero does not stand here. The child does. Not asking. Not waiting. Simply breathing. You notice how the child does not distinguish between strength and vulnerability. It has not learned that division yet. It responds to what is alive, not to what is appropriate. This realization settles slowly, like dust in warm light. Fire burns at the center, but it is subdued. A glow rather than a flame. It does not demand sacrifice. It asks for presence. You feel how much effort you once spent feeding fires that could never be satisfied. Fires of ambition. Fires of identity. This fire remains steady regardless of what you offer. It is not fueled by striving. You sit, though sitting is more an attitude than a posture. The temple does not require reverence. It requires honesty. As you remain, images drift through without insistence. Moments of failure. Moments of tenderness. Moments when you turned away. Moments when you stayed. None of them dominate. They pass like clouds reflected in still water. You notice how judgment has lost urgency. It has not disappeared. It simply no longer commands the center. The need to separate good from bad, worthy from unworthy, has softened. You see how that division once helped you survive. You also see how it limited your capacity to remain whole. The presence deepens. It does not expand outward. It draws inward. You feel yourself gathered rather than elevated, integrated without being unified. The paradox does not disturb you. You allow it to exist without pressure. Meaning arises not as conclusion, but as resonance. A sense that something essential has aligned, even if nothing has been resolved. Water appears again, this time as breath. Inhale, the chest opens. Exhale, the body settles. You sense how rhythm itself is a form of dialogue, giving and receiving without commentary. The psyche breathes the same way. Expansion followed by release. Contact followed by withdrawal. Neither superior. Both necessary. You remain in the temple long enough for time to lose relevance. When movement returns, it does not pull you forward. It turns you slightly, just enough to reveal another perspective within the same space. You understand that depth does not always require descent. Sometimes it requires staying. The fire continues to glow. The child continues to observe. The presence remains unspoken. You rise without leaving. The forest does not reclaim you. It accompanies you. What unfolds next will not introduce something new. It will bring you back, carrying what has been quietly rearranged, into relation with the world you thought you left behind. You return without returning. The forest loosens its edges, and the world you remember begins to seep back in, but it does not reclaim you. It approaches cautiously, as if sensing that something in you no longer responds the way it once did. Familiar shapes appear, yet they feel quieter, less insistent. They wait for you to meet them, rather than demanding your immediate allegiance. The tension you carried earlier has not vanished. It has condensed. It lives closer to the center now, less scattered, less reactive. You feel it as a steady pulse beneath your movements, a reminder that aliveness includes friction. The difference is subtle but decisive. You are no longer trying to eliminate the tension. You are allowing it to inform you. Images from the descent rise again. The mirror flashes briefly in the corner of your awareness, not as confrontation, but as reminder. The river murmurs beneath the surface of daily sound, not asking you to step in, only to remember its presence. Fire flickers when warmth is needed, then recedes. None of these symbols demand interpretation. They function as living coordinates, orienting you without instruction. You notice how easily you once slipped into extremes, into certainty or collapse, into control or surrender. The psyche now resists those shortcuts. It asks for something more nuanced, more patient, a way of being that does not abandon complexity in exchange for relief. You feel the strain of this at times. It would be easier to declare victory or defeat. The work refuses both. The hero stirs once more, but it does not rise. It watches. Its pride is softened into discernment. It recognizes that action still matters, but not every moment requires conquest. There is a dignity and restraint that it had not learned before. You sense its willingness to serve rather than dominate. This shift carries weight. It alters how energy moves through you. The child remains present, though less visible. You feel it in moments of spontaneous attention, when something small arrests you without reason, when curiosity arises without agenda, when you listen without preparing a response. These moments feel fragile, easily overlooked. You protect them not by clinging, but by allowing them to pass and return in their own time. You begin to recognize how much of your life was shaped by avoidance. Avoidance of uncertainty, avoidance of contradiction, avoidance of the quiet ache that arises when meaning is not immediately accessible. Now, when that ache surfaces, you do not rush to soothe it. You stay. You let it breathe. You let it teach you its rhythm. There is a sense of gathering, not accumulation but convergence. Parts of you that once pulled in different directions now orbit the same center without merging. You feel coherence without uniformity. This state does not announce itself as achievement. It feels ordinary, grounded, almost disappointingly simple. And yet it carries depth. You notice how your relationship to others has shifted, even in imagination. The urge to correct, to persuade, to prove has weakened. You listen more for what moves beneath words. You sense the same forest in others, the same river, the same fire. This recognition does not make you indulgent. It makes you careful, respectful of the distances each psyche requires. Silence grows more articulate. Pauses between thoughts feel fuller, less empty. You realize how much you once feared these pauses, filling them quickly with distraction or noise. Now they offer something else, a space where the psyche rearranges itself without supervision. You trust this process more than you trust conclusions. The presence that accompanied you throughout does not withdraw. It integrates. You feel it as an underlying steadiness, a quiet confidence that does not depend on certainty. It does not shield you from confusion. It allows confusion to exist without collapsing your orientation. This becomes your new reference point. You sense the arc reaching its fullest tension here, not through drama, but through density. Everything you encountered presses close at once. Mirror, forest, fire, water, child, hero, presence. They do not clash. They overlap. You hold them together without forcing synthesis. The effort of this holding is real. It asks for attention, patience, humility. Breath slows again. You feel the moment stretch, rich and unresolved. Nothing more needs to happen. Nothing needs to end. The crescendo is not a peak. It is a fullness that sustains itself briefly before easing, allowing what has been gathered to settle into a quieter form. You sense the movement toward continuation beginning, gentle and inevitable, carrying you toward the next phase without signaling departure. You do not step away from what you have encountered. It settles around you, within you, as quietly as breath after exertion. The intensity softens not because it is complete, but because it no longer needs to press. It has found room. It has found attention. The forest does not vanish. It thins into memory, into sensation, into a subtle orientation that accompanies you without effort. You sense its presence when you pause unexpectedly, when a familiar thought fails to grip you as tightly as before. It is there when silence feels inhabited rather than empty. The mirror no longer confronts you. It glimmers occasionally, catching fragments of yourself in passing moments. A reaction that surprises you. A tenderness that appears without explanation. A restraint where impulse once dominated. You do not linger on these reflections. You let them pass, knowing they belong to a larger movement you no longer need to supervise. Fire remains as warmth, not excitement, not urgency. A steady heat that supports rather than consumes. You recognize when it dims and when it brightens, without interpreting either as failure or success. The psyche regulates itself when allowed. You trust this more now. The river continues its course beneath the surface of your days. You hear it in moments of loss, in moments of release, in moments when something familiar drifts away without resistance. You no longer chase what flows. You allow it to nourish what remains unseen. The hero walks beside you now, no longer in front. It lends strength when needed and steps back when listening matters more. The child appears in flashes, brief and unannounced, reminding you of attention without agenda. Neither demands permanence. Both require respect. The presence that held you throughout does not name itself. It does not need recognition. It operates through alignment rather than command. When you move against yourself, you feel the friction sooner. When you move with what is alive, there is less noise. This becomes guidance enough. You notice how the world feels slightly more transparent. Not safer, not kinder, simply less opaque. You sense the undercurrents moving through conversations, through choices, through moments that once felt flat. This awareness does not elevate you. It humbles you. It asks you to move carefully, to listen longer, to speak less when words are premature. There is no conclusion waiting for you, no final synthesis to arrive at. What is opened cannot be closed without cost, and it does not ask to be closed. It asks to be lived with, to be consulted, to be allowed to interrupt you when you forget. You will return to habits, to distractions, to certainty. This is not failure. It is rhythm. Each return carries the possibility of remembering. Each forgetting carries the seed of another descent. The dialogue does not end because it was never meant to. You remain attentive now in a different way. Not vigilant, not passive, present. You carry the forest in your breath, the fire in your chest, the river in your pauses. You walk without announcing arrival. You listen without demanding clarity. And somewhere beneath your next thought, beneath the next decision you make, something continues to watch with you, breathing slowly, waiting patiently, not for answers, but for your willingness to stay.